All right, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to talk about Gervonta Davis fighting the worst fighter ever, according to Chris Colbert, and that is Romero in December. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back. So Chris Colbert, man, is one of my favorite young fighters coming up, and he was on a podcast with a couple other really great fighters in that lower weight class. Keyshawn Davis, who was coming out of the Olympics, and who I think he had a couple professional fights, was coming out of the Olympics, silver medalist, really good fighter. Shakur Stevenson, who was the former 126-pound WBO champion, and who's going to be fighting Jamel Herring for the WBO 130-pound title. So they were all in this conversation, man, talking about Gervonta Davis, talking about the talking about those divisions and who was fighting who. And when Chris Colbert started talking about Romero, the only thing that I could think is, man, thank you for saying that. And because I was wondering just out of my own eyes, man, if what he said is true. And what he said was that Romero is about the worst fighter that he's ever seen. He said he's like the worst fighter ever. And I'm telling you, man, as much publicity as Romero gets, I cannot understand for the life of me what people see in Romero, other than the fact that other than his mouthpiece and the fact that he is willing to say, whatever. But other than that, he's just not on the level of these, of these fighters. It's just like Riley is pretty much all talk and no substance. But we have an opportunity really in boxing to be seeing like the guys in the actual conversation in Gervonta Davis, those guys fighting each other who are all legitimate. Like, it was just wild to see all of these guys who are top-notch fighters. And I can't speak for Keyshawn Davis because he hasn't had enough fights, but for sure Chris Colbert and Shakur Stevenson, two guys I do believe they're out of the New York, New Jersey area. I know for sure Shakur Stevenson is from New Jersey. I believe that Chris Colbert is from New Jersey too, but he might be from New York. And you got you have Gervonta Davis, who's from Baltimore. And you have all of these guys around the same age, around the same talent. And what we're talking about is these guys fighting pretty much anybody but themselves. And if you look out, into the future, it's like the likelihood of these guys ever getting into the ring with each other is limited. So to hear Chris Colbert say that about Romero, I thought I was absolutely like, yep, you're right on spot. You're right on point about that. But what are we going to do to make sure, where you guys actually get to fight? Because, it's just boxing right now is like split. There's a lot of really good fighters. I mean, I can name good fighter after good fighter after good fighter, but I can't name good boxing match after good boxing match after good boxing match. And in fact, right now there's more sideshows and freak shows that, at the top of the sport where where the really good fighters and the good fights are buried underneath and never get to come to light. Now, what I would have rather have heard, other than just kind of clowning and saying that Romero, was the worst fight ever, I would love to have heard some urgency in the voice of Chris Colbert about fighting Gervonta Davis, because I think that is a fight, that's a legitimate fight that could have been made at 130 pounds. But, just the way that boxing works, we all know it's not going to happen. Gervonta Davis is represented by Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Mayweather Promotions, and they've got a plan for him. And that plan for him is to fight as many guys, as he can possibly fight that have no chance to win, but have, something about them that will allow them to draw fans into the arena. Now, they do that with the thought that is eventually going to lead to like superstardom for Gervonta Davis. And I don't believe that is going to ever be the case with Gervonta Davis. And in fact, I think that when people are calling a lot of the champions and people, superstars right now, that really that word doesn't apply when you compare it to like the guys that were superstars before. Like Canelo Alvarez, for instance, they say that Canelo Alvarez is a superstar, or Canelo Alvarez is the biggest name in boxing, which very well may be true. I don't think that there's a lot of argument that can be made for that. He's definitely a big name, and I can't really think of anybody, much bigger than him. But that doesn't mean when you compare him to like a Sugar Ray Leonard and how big Sugar Ray Leonard was when Sugar Ray Leonard was fighting, that Canelo Alvarez is as big as Sugar Ray Leonard, because he's just not. And the reason I do believe that he's not is because he's not consistently putting the fights out there that are really drawing everybody to him. It's just a bunch of fights where, they celebrate the fact that Canelo Alvarez is walking into the ring against anybody, and then the marketing and all that stuff around it talks about how good he is, but you never actually get to see that in the ring with fights like Callum Smith and fights like, Yaldemir. I mean, back to back to back to back. I mean, most people, throughout the history of boxing have had light touches in between certain fights, or they might have had stretches, where, they weren't really fighting they really didn't fight the best, or, later in their career. But for fighters in their prime, and for it to be consistent throughout, I mean, it's pretty consistent throughout boxing, with the major exception being Errol Spence Jr., that people really aren't fighting each other. So, at the same time, man, that they call Rolly Romero the worst boxer ever, obviously Rolly Romero's doing something right by being a knockout puncher and somebody that is willing to say, whatever. And I guess that's just, that's what the times we are in boxing, where, the marketing of the fight is absolutely more important than the quality of the fight itself, right? So it's like fast food boxing or something. You put a pretty label on it, you market it or whatever, but you eat it and you realize that it's garbage, right? Like my wife and I went on, a month without eating fast food and just cooking in the house. And even though it's not, we don't have a chef in the house where we're just making basic meals for ourselves, after having eaten a month of just good food that me and my wife are cooking, I went back and got some Whataburger or whatever. And I was like, man, this is nowhere near as good as I thought it was once I got some real solid food. Then I think the same thing would be the case if boxing fans were able to actually see, really high quality boxing matches instead of this marketed stuff. Because when you look at Rolly Romero doesn't have, it's just so many things in his game that he doesn't have, like defense, right? There's a sparring match that was aired between Devin Haney and Rolly Romero. And the only way that I can describe that whole thing was that it was an absolute joke. Rolly Romero was running around the ring, throwing these wild punches at Devin Haney, and Devin Haney would just slip to the inside and pop him up, push him off, right? And, rinse and repeat. And that's what's going to happen if Rolly Romero fights Gervonta Davis. It's just going to be a situation where Rolly Romero's chasing him around. Gervonta Davis is going to slip punches for a little while, fight on the outside, wind up catching Rolly Romero when he comes in with something, and he's going to knock Rolly Romero out. It'll be a big event. It'll be an event, right? An event. But in the heart of real boxing fans will know that it's a mismatch. So anyway, when Chris Colbert said that, I thought that was real funny. But, it's also just sad to know that the Rolly Romero fight is so much more realistic than the Chris Colbert fight with Gervonta, or the Shakur Stevenson fight with Gervonta, or later down the road, Chris Colbert fighting Shakur Stevenson. But it is what it is, man. We live in a time where it's Evander Holyfield versus Belfort, and a steroid user, and Oscar Valdez getting away with it. This is the highlight of your weekend. But anyway, that's my take on the situation. You let me know what you think in the comment section, and with that, I'm out. Peace.